Good morning, Sargent Church. May the peace of Christ be with you. Now, today is Peace Sunday. It's the Sunday where we remember that we are people of peace. And as followers of Christ, we believe that Jesus modeled a way of life that calls us to live at peace with one another, with others in the world, and with creation. It is also a Sunday where we reflect on the wars and violence that has happened and continues to happen in our world. We remember not as a way to glorify the violence, nor to view ourselves as better than others, but rather we remember to remind ourselves that we need to continue to work towards peace. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what it means to be people of peace for us in today's day and age. More specifically, what does it mean to be people of peace and to stand in solidarity with people who are oppressed on the margins and with people who are facing violence through racism on a daily basis? Typically, I think we Mennonites have agreed that we need to stand in solidarity with oppressed people groups. This is what we see Jesus do time and time again in the Bible. And the gospel message is a message of hope that is geared more towards marginalized peoples. And so today we stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, with Black people, and with other people of color. But I think we Mennonites also have a reputation of being the quiet in the land. We're there, but we don't often engage. Now, this is changing a bit, but historically, Mennonites typically didn't vote. They didn't engage in conflicts or politics with the community around them, and they weren't really that vocal when it came to calling out injustices. The Mennonites did try to live peacefully, but really only amongst themselves. When they were dragged into conflicts, they had a tendency to up and move somewhere else where they could remain living in peace. Now, I'm not going to critique this too hard because Mennonites certainly had every right to flee when they were being persecuted and slaughtered during the various wars that they have experienced. Survival comes first, and that is good that they fled. But the reputation of being the silent in the land has also had an impact on our generation. We are now in a time where we can live in relative peace. There are wars going on in this world, but for the most part, they are happening in a different part of the world. We can go about our day-to-day lives without fear of being attacked, enslaved, or killed. And because we have this luxury, being silent actually comes off to marginalized peoples as being ignorant, racist, and oppressive. Here's a quote from Richard Rohr that I think speaks to our situation as Mennonites. He writes, "There really is no such thing as being non-political. Everything we say or do either affirms or critiques the status quo. Even to say nothing is to say something. If we say nothing, we communicate that the status quo, even if it is massively unjust and deceitful, is apparently okay. And this common non-political stance is an illusion, and the powerful have always been able to use it to manipulate people." I think many of us are starting to recognize this, that silence only benefits the oppressor and further oppresses the people on the margins. Silence doesn't value the story of the victim, but rather it emboldens and gives more power to the already powerful. I think we are starting to understand this better. We are becoming more vocal when it comes to standing in solidarity with people of color. We are starting to call out racist tendencies more and more, but there are still times where we fall back to our silent tendencies. We just disguise it now. we disguise it as religion. So we say things like, I cannot get involved in that rally and stand in solidarity with that movement because they have been getting violent recently, and I am a person of peace. I support their rights, but I cannot condone their actions. I have heard this numerous times, and I have even uttered these words myself. But lately, I have been wondering if this is just an excuse to stay silent and not get involved. Am I just saying that I'll stand in solidarity, but only on my terms? Only if it's easy for me, and only if everyone else behaves the way that I expect? Now let me be clear, I am not condoning the violence. Yes, I think that we need to still work towards peace. We need to stand by our own personal beliefs and convictions. But we also need to question our actions and our inactions when there is oppression happening around us. And we need to stop disguising our inactions as religious piety. Now, in the passage that was read for us this morning, the parable of the Good Samaritan, this is exactly what Jesus called out. This is a very familiar passage. Even people who don't know the story or know it's from the Bible know the idea behind the Good Samaritan. It's so familiar that it has produced laws here in Canada, the Good Samaritan law. Now, unfortunately, it has become skewed so that this law just protects the person who is helping, and it's become a fail-safe from being sued. But regardless, my point is that this is a well-known story. And we tend to read the parable and agree that it is a good life lesson. It's important to help others in need and to be neighbors to those who we pass by on the road. But when we boil it down to just that, to just a good life lesson, then I think we miss a few key details of the passage. Now, I want to go over a few of these key details because I think it makes clear that this passage is about more than just being a good neighbor. And so let's get right into it. And the first key detail is about the injured person on the side of the road. And it's important to note that the injured person goes unnamed. I've heard interpretations where people begin to try and identify this person, and it only leads to problems. I've heard people falsely say that this is a Samaritan person being helped by a Samaritan. And so this parable says that we're supposed to help our own kind. Similarly, I've heard people say that the injured man was maybe an Israelite, and that means we only need to help out when it's God's chosen people. And therefore, regardless of which misinterpretation you use, it means we're only obligated to help those within the church. But when we read the entire gospel, that's clearly not what Jesus was about. And then I've also heard misinterpretations that also say the injured man was a Samaritan. And since the Samaritans were even more oppressed than the Israelites, it shows that we're supposed to help those who are less than us. But this just creates a savior complex and further divides the gap between the rich and poor, the powerful and the marginalized. But Jesus doesn't actually name who the injured person is. And this is important because it actually highlights that we should help the injured person regardless of who they are. Whether they think like us or not, we should help. Now, the second detail that I want to highlight, and this one is really key, it is important that the Israelites who passed by on the other side were a priest and a Levite. These were the people who worked in the synagogue or the temple. They had a job to do. They had to help with the sacrifices, with keeping the incense burning, and with leading the people, the Israelite people, in worship of God. Essentially, they were the pastors and the worship leaders of their day. And then another important thing to note about that is that the Israelites had a system in place for who could enter into the temple and do these various tasks. They had to be priests or Levites, but they also had to be clean. If you go back to the Old Testament in Leviticus, you can read all about what makes a person clean or unclean. And a few examples of what makes a person unclean is eating certain foods, wearing certain clothes, being sick, obviously, giving birth to a child, being in contact with a dead body, bleeding, and simply being in contact with someone who is bleeding. All of these and so many more things made a person unclean and therefore ineligible to enter into the temple. And then to become clean again, there was a certain amount of time that had to pass, and usually a certain ritual that had to be performed, depending on what made you unclean. So when the priest and the Levite passed by on the other side, it wasn't that they were just giving a cold shoulder and ignoring the injustice that happened. They weren't ignoring the injured individual. Rather, they likely had sympathy for that person. It probably hurt their hearts, but they knew that if they were in contact with this person, it would mean that they would become unclean and they could not enter the temple for a while. They could not do their jobs. So helping this one individual meant that they could not offer sacrifices to God on behalf of many people. They could not lead the people into worship of God. So helping one person now meant that they would not be able to help many others down the road in the temple. So it's likely that when people heard Jesus telling this parable, they would not have been appalled by the actions of the priest or Levite. Rather, they probably would have nodded along, understanding that they have work to do in the temple, and so they couldn't help. That's just the system that was in place. And it took someone from outside the system to actually help. Someone who wasn't tied to the religious restrictions of the time. It took someone who was typically despised by the Israelites to poke holes into their system. It took someone on the margins to change and revolutionize the way things were done. And that leads to the third important detail. It's important that the person who did stop to help was a Samaritan. And it's important because it shows that the dominant group or the people with power don't always have everything right. It highlights that people from different cultures, societies, and even different religions sometimes understand God's way of love better than the so-called people of God. And it shows that it takes someone from the margins to call out the injustices in the system. And when we remember these important details, I think it completely changes our understanding of what is being asked of us as Christ followers. We can frame this parable in today's terms for us in Winnipeg, and it gives us a very solemn picture. For example, a man was sleeping on a park bench in the dead of winter with no jacket. A pastor drove by on his way to Sunday worship. He noticed the man sleeping but kept driving as he was already running late. So too did every other member of the church. But then a van from Main Street Project stopped at the bench, gave the man a coat and a meal, and drove him to a place where he could get a warm and safe bed. Or a rally in support of upholding a treaty was happening at Portage in Maine and was stopping rush hour traffic. An elder of the church was leaving work and got stopped in the traffic. And instead of getting out to join, she found a detour that allowed her to slowly get home. Another church member, thinking it would be good to stand in solidarity, instead decided to stay home because he didn't think stopping traffic was the best way to get others' attention. but volunteers from the Bear Clan showed up and stood in solidarity. Or the Pride Parade was happening on a Sunday morning, as it usually does. A pastor sympathized with the movement, but she drove past because she had a sermon to deliver at her church. Another member from the church had a child who was marching in the parade, but instead of supporting the child, he went to the Sunday service because he was afraid of what others might think. But hundreds of other people who didn't have to attend church came out to show their love and support. Now, I can share example after example, and I'd like to think that these are all just metaphorical, but I'm pretty sure these have all happened in some way or another to most of us. I know I've used some of these excuses to not get involved. Now, I'm not saying that we need to overwork ourselves and start attending every single rally, and that we should go solo in helping feed and give shelter to homeless people. But we do need to honestly start questioning and evaluating our actions and our inactions. Time and time again, we see other organizations and other people from outside the church showing up and showing love. And the church is too busy with their own meetings, their own services, and their own agendas. But if we truly want to see peace, and if we truly want to be people of peace, then we need to stop being the silent in the land, and we need to show up and show God's love to the people on the margins. The people who are oppressed have been standing in solidarity with one another, and the church has largely remained absent. It's time for us to show up and be the neighbors that Jesus calls us to be.